get started here. Um, those who are listening, this is the official CFFB podcast, not to be confused with the Schmucks and the unofficial podcast beast. I'm Brian. I am the commissioner of the CFB League. I'm joined here today by Lewis, who is the coach of Baylor. Lewis, how are you doing?
Good. I'm ready to get back into fantasy football. I think it's you and I are probably on similar courses or trajectories with this, but like it was something I used to do all the time, and now I've kind of narrowed it. I mean, it's down to 2 leagues for me, and something that like I don't know, like I don't know if like the first time in a minute, like I'm actually like making charts and following stuff and like ready to go.
Probably didn't do that much for NFLU's auction, did you?
No, I just throw shit at the wall there and see what sticks.
Same. I usually don't come in that prepared, but I
It
I
gives
think
me a good like idea for this though, which I think is kind of nice.
yeah, I definitely find myself getting my legs under me just to kind of know what's going on with that league. But um, that's here nor there. Today we're just kind of trying to do some uh, prep for hopefully the upcoming auction. Just some state of the union kind of address pieces. We still have 5 openings we need to fill. The teams that are open as of today are Stanford in Pac-12, Kent State in minor, Fresno State in minor, and New Mexico in minor, and then Auburn in SEC. So those teams need to get filled. Did I say 5 or is it 4? Is there another one that I had missing? Stanford, Auburn, Kent State, Fresno, and New Mexico. So 5. So we need to get down to one in each conference, and then we could theoretically start at least one vacancy in each conference. So we need to at least get 2 more filled in minor before we'll move forward, even if I have to fill in for taking over 2 teams and just autopiloting them. But once I get started, we're hoping to really shortly after that get into our regularly scheduled programming for recruiting auctions. And so today we're just going to kind of give some, for a lot of people who are new to the league, we're going to give some ideas to what you guys should be expecting. If you've never done one of these auctions before or aren't that familiar with the format, this is a great opportunity to kind of get your legs under you, kind of come in with an understanding, and we'll kind of fill that in. And then Lewis and I have been in this format for 8 years now in different leagues, so we are pretty comfortable and know what to look for, how to assess teams, maybe understand what to expect in upcoming auctions, and we hope to kind of use some of that knowledge to kind of hopefully inform people maybe what we would think to expect to see in the auctions, and kind of hopefully help people navigate and prep a bit more, as well as just give us something to talk about over the off season. So with that said, obviously we do everything on MFL. Given the uniqueness of the league format, everything has to be done there. If you've never done an auction on MFL or are unsure where to go for these things, on MFL there is a section up at the top here called Draft Auctions. In there is these 2 primary spots called Auction Results and Auction Bids. For this, actually I should probably have set this up, but too late. This is where you go to Auction Bid. In the Auction Bid, there will be this hub where you will see all the open auctions going on at the moment, as well as kind of an understanding of how much your budget's there, and if you have any open nominations, what available player field is there. Something really important for our group to understand is, as a reminder, there's 2 copies allowed in every conference. So the way MFL works is they don't really work very well with 2 copies available. So what happens is you don't see the 2 copies, you only see one name in the player field. So one big thing for newcomers to understand is that there's potentially always a second copy available, and it's kind of a lesson in patience in making sure that you kind of keep an understanding of if this is the first copy of Caleb Williams or if it's the second copy of Caleb Williams. You can adjust your strategy to know what you need to strive for or what you need to go after instead of blowing your budget all up at once.
And there's a transaction history tab on each player. Mm-hmm. So if you aren't sure, you can click on any, it happens for anybody, click on that player, click on the transaction history, and it'll give you really that breakdown for each copy throughout the entire league. So again, you're going to get, I don't even know how many conferences we have, but you're going to get, like Brian said, there's going to be 2 for each conference. So if there's 6 conferences, there'll be up to 12 data points on the screen where you can track and look and see, again, if you're on the first or second copy.
Yeah, that'll be a big one, because once a player's on the board, it won't even show in the nomination field that there is a second copy available. It just will not show that player. It's just a wonky MFL thing, and people just need to learn to adjust to it. It's, I think, one of the biggest learning curves, even from the first year that we did it, that people were just trying to always remember there's a second copy. A lot of people have gotten better at it, but for newcomers, that's one of the biggest adjustments, is just remembering there's a second copy. It doesn't always show itself, and things like that, but those things are worth noting. The transaction history page is really useful for confirming, like Lou said, against those things. So those are those pieces. Then there's always the auction results page. I tend to give let me see if I can pull it up quick. I always tend to give an auction summary page for people to follow on a spreadsheet. Let's see if I can find it quickly. I'll pull up last year's. So I provide a spreadsheet like this that will show a bunch of different fields. It'll show tabs of information per conference, and it'll show budgets. Because we do so many unique things like Devy rebates, which we'll get into, and transfers, it's kind of hard to keep track of all the money. I provide a sheet that kind of details those things out, but this is a similar piece that's under that draft auction results tab. It can show a summary, so it kind of shows who's open, how much money is available, and what's left for each conference or your conference. If you go to detailed results, usually it'll show the player name and bid. The big challenge with MFL and this exact report for people is that second copy piece, it doesn't really work very well. So once the second copy of a player's won in a conference, it kind of wipes that first copy off the detailed results page. So if you wanted to know what people's are priced at, I'd go to transaction page, go to auctions 1, and search for that, and it'll tell you who that group is, or those players are. And I would use that as a better frame of reference if you're trying to find previous pricing throughout the auction. For the auction itself, teams normally get 3 nominations to put up on the board. We'll get into the nuance between the transfer upperclassman piece of the auction and then the rookie, but the rookie one is the primary bulk of the auction, and there's 3 nominations that you can have at any time, and we don't tend to open that up until over 90% of the auction's total money has been spent or allocated by the entire league. So it gives people a chance to do that, and people can get very creative with auctions, nominations, because if you put more people on the field, there's more places to put money on the board. So some people really spam an auction board with nominations just to get as many people out there, and then people have to allocate and kind of disperse their dollars on these different players. And some people try to shrink the board if they're trying to really get people to spend more on a smaller player field in the hopes that they can reap some of those things out. So people do use nominations strategically. I would try to find what works best for you. Some people always put the best player available. Some people try to hide people that they don't really want, or keep people that they really want off the board for longer. I don't know, Lou, if you have certain strategies. I think it all always kind of is a case-by-case basis for things, but I don't know if you have anything to add on how nominations are used.
I mean, you hit on a little bit of it, like controlling, the supply and demand of the board. I think another thing just to kind of note, I know you and I have talked about this before, and it's just like a personal preference, but you do get 3 nominations here, and when you're in the auction room, it's a little bit easier to kind of see how this looks, but you'll have, when you enter it, anybody that's up for auction will be in there, and then you'll have the list of players that you can nominate. Once you meet that, whatever that is, 3, the available player list goes away, and so it's one of those things, like, preference-wise, like, some people like to see what's out there, especially as you kind of get towards, I don't want to say the end, but like when you're getting to the point where, like, okay, strategically you're at a point where it's like maybe the middle to end, like things kind of like your last couple pieces really matter, your moves really matter. It's just kind of, at least on my end, nice to still have access to see right in. I mean, there's other ways to get it, but to have it right in front of you in the auction room, just to see who's still there in case you need like a plan B or a backup or whatever it is. I just kind of sometimes don't throw all 3 out there so that I can have that flexibility in the auction room.
That's a good point, especially the fact that it goes away. I think sometimes people forget, and then you kind of lose your level of understanding of what players are left. The other thing I was going to say about nominations is, in total, you think about it, there's 16 teams. If teams can put 3, 2 or 3, might be 2. Let me double check that quick. It's hard to remember between different groups, but 2 nominations. So sorry, not 3, 2. So 2 times 16 means there's 32 players on a board for most of the auctions, and it's up to 40. So you think about that, 40 different players are being bid on. It just kind of spreads it out a lot. It's kind of sometimes can be difficult to manage for people to know what to spend or what to put money on. For me, I always try to focus on the players that are about to come off the board, or the soonest to come off the board, and try to put a lot of my focus on what's being bid on, what I'm putting my action and attention to, because the big thing to remember is there's always a 12-hour clock. A lot of these players all have to come off where they have to have the same team with the highest bid for 12 straight hours. If they get outbid by someone for a proxy, which we'll get into proxies here in just a moment, that clock resets. And so I try to put my attention on the soonest items, the soonest players coming off the board. One, because then you can kind of not spread your dollars out too quickly, because if you do become a proxy, or if you do become the highest bidder, that dollar amount comes off your allowable dollars to spend, and you kind of are just limiting your flexibility to do things, especially if there's like a really cheap player about to come off the board and your dollars are tied up on all these other players. it becomes impossible for you to do something along those lines. So I try to, for new people who are unfamiliar with auctions, I try to put a lot of my emphasis on like the players that are about to come off the board, and try to make my decisions if I'm going to bid on someone. Like, can I live with this player going off at this price, or do I need to bid them up a few dollars or whatever? But I tend to go the players that are soonest. I don't know about you, Lou, if you do anything different, but that's where I put a lot of my attention on an auction board for these groups.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's different. I mean, I enjoy the last second stuff, but I also enjoy like, because again, this is open, so you'll be able to see who's actively bidding against you for certain players. So I always like to make sure that I mess around with the people that are messing with me, and that's just my personal thing. I mean, I don't. It's not for everybody, obviously, 'cause there's risk with that. Whether you get stuck with a player you don't truly want or too high priced of a player. Um, but I always enjoy that aspect of the auction in terms of maybe there's uh, a team that has a similar strategy that's bidding on your players and that upsets you, or a buddy that's in there that you want to take a couple shots at or something. I always just kind of enjoy that on top of obviously the last second stuff, but I also too like to put into like you'll get a feel for your auction real quick as to like who's able to bid when, who's actively engaged in the auction, who doesn't show up that often, and you can kind of get a feel for when in your conference players are more likely to come off the board. So then maybe if you know place a relatively high proxy bid on somebody at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Uh, Maybe that only has to really hold you 5 hours, because it's after 10 p.m. The rest of your conference is like going to sleep and nobody's going to check until 6 a.m. in the morning. And at 5 a.m., your players come off the board. So I'm always kind of like actively watching the clock in that aspect. Probably, and maybe even more so than, when it turns red and says, hey, there's 2 hours left.
That's a good point. So yeah, the clock really, with the 12 hours, players can come off in a day, but at least to start, I find it that it really lasts like the first 24 hours. I think depending on kind of when and how active people are, and it kind of depends on the conference. That first day, you could get a few players off the board. I think like if we compared it to NFLU, which we were in, I think our division in that one didn't really bid a lot in the overnight. No one really got up at 2-3 in the morning and like bid on players, so it was pretty cyclical. Like we would all get up 6 a.m., maybe do a little last second bidding, but we kind of got in this cycle of like 6 p.m. was like the final bid period for us for the day, and then we all kind of set our piece on the players, and they would come off the board at that price. Maybe a few dollars went on to players as that, but the time of day is important. But with that 12-hour clock, I think it gives everyone who is paying attention with some modicum, you really can find an hour, a 15-minute period in your day to just check the board and bid on who you want and make those decisions on who's going to come off the clock within that 12 hours. And I think that gives people a lot of time to not have to always be present on the board. They can make, interval check-ins and feel pretty confident that they're not being duped or missing out on something, because the board will progress, pricing will change, and things like that. And then, as Lou mentioned, everything's very public, so you can see, as you can see on my screen, in MFL, and you can get notifications on this sent to you through text or email, as well through MFL. It'll tell you who's being bid on, and it'll tell you who did the bidding. And I set this up this way when we created this league because I think the transparency piece just adds another layer that in auctions, if you've never done one before, there's a lot of sniping at the end of things, trying to increase bids, and there's always a lot of these like butthurt feelings like it. But I'm always a proponent that if you're not willing to like put your name to a bid, then you really shouldn't be doing the bid. So if you're going to like try to up the dollar amount on a player at the last moment or snipe someone, it should be pretty well known. Plus, the information fuels the other side, and people know kind of how to operate around you and learn some of your behaviors, which I think just makes it more competitive of a league, to be honest. So people who pay attention can get some edges on things if they're willing to. Talked about 12-hour clock. I guess the next thing is really the proxy piece. That's the other really big function that I think if you're new to this, you don't necessarily understand it, but it's very important. So MFL's system is a long bid with a proxy system. And so the proxy system is essentially you allocating a dollar amount of what you would like to spend or what you're willing to spend on a player. And MFL will hold that dollar amount, but it will set let's say you do a price of, here, this is a good example. The Red Hawks had initially put a proxy of like $7 at least. And so every time Western Michigan bid on them up $1, it still held Miami, the Red Hawks, as the highest bidder. And so their proxy was high enough that they were able to stave off someone bidding them up. And the system just kind of keeps that dollar amount in its mind and until it goes over that proxy, and then it will reset the highest bidder. So if Lou says he's got a busy day at the juice shop, he wants to really get, Keon Coleman or something because he's the best player left on the board. He's got enough money. He just wants to set a high proxy of like $40 or something. System will hold that $40. It'll start it at 0 as well as all these other players on the board. And as people kind of bid up throughout the day, it will continue to hold Lou's spot as the highest bid until someone gets over that $40. Lou could adjust his proxy at any time throughout that period. If he wants to, he could bring it down. He could go higher to make shifts in how the board's playing out. He can make that flexibility, but the proxy system is there as really a convenience. So people who are not familiar with it should try to get familiar with understanding that. Try to really set your prices at what you're willing to spend for a guy. That way you're not likely to be kind of butthurt, I guess is the best maybe framing for it. Like, oh, I wish I just put more money on him, but I didn't realize I could do that, or I didn't realize I could bid this up. And it kind of also saves you from feeling the need to like increase bids $1 at a time. You can kind of just set a high dollar amount, and it does have enough understanding to know it goes like with the best bid for you based on what you set. So proxies are definitely an important piece of this, and understanding that is paramount. But and some people get creative, like some of the behavior stuff I talked about too is you'll learn maybe some patterns on what people tend to bid. If it's like $5 increments or $10 increments, or some people might bid $1 over, or they always bid in like intervals of 7, or I don't know. People tend to get a little crafty with how they do these proxies, and you can kind of pick up on some of that if you gain enough familiarity with someone.
Right, and sometimes it'll be used for like Brian said, for these strategic reasons. You'll see like maybe somebody's driving up the price, and so it's not always going to be like sometimes it is, and it's always funny to me that the board always, people are bidding in intervals of 5 or 10, and everything's even. And so like when you do that and that's the case, you get somebody, so like maybe your Marvin Harrison Jr. is at $150, and somebody goes, I'll go a little bit higher. Maybe they only make it 159, and you bid that even interval of 5 and 10, and now you're at 160. So like there's some use there strategically in what number specifically you're using as that proxy. We'll see it too. Like I can't remember who I did it to, but I did it to somebody the very first year here with the Devy rebate, and I can't remember what the dollar amount is. It was like $10 or $20 or whatever it was. Um, everybody just assumed that because that I had like a $20 proxy on them, so they're like, oh well, we're just gonna bump it because we just got a $20 proxy on them. Well, I put it on 19, and then somebody paid $20 for like a third string tight end. I can't even remember who the player was. I'm trying to think. He was at a take. Yeah, I was gonna say he's at the tight end at a Texas A&M, but I could not remember what his name was. And it's just like one of those things where, for whatever reason, somebody was making the mistake that, because I had gotten my 20 back anyway, so it didn't really matter if I got them for less than that. And somebody came in and was messing around and put a $20 proxy on them when I only had it for 19, and they paid $19 for a tight end that I don't even think made the team out of training. I can't remember, but so there are some strategic uses for the proxy bid. And then the only other thing I really want to say about it, Brian said obviously you can change your proxy bid and increase it and decrease it. The only caveat is when you decrease, if you're, let's say you put in a proxy of $50 on a guy, the current high bid is 20. If you want to lower it, you can only come down to $1 above what it currently is. So you can only drop down to $21. Other than that, you can move, up and down freely as you wish.
Yeah, and so there definitely becomes a point in time, especially near the end of the auction, where budgets are getting tight. You can kind of read the board and really figure out what someone's proxy is on a player, because either they have so much money spread out or they only have so many dollars left, and you can kind of say, oh, clearly their proxy is going to be this, and you can always just immediately outbid them on those pieces. So some of that stuff kind of bears light in certain spaces. But you did bring up Devy, so we'll transition to kind of just framing the understanding with Devy. So Devy is a piece of this league. It's not a full-blown Devy league like some of those hardcore ones. This is kind of like Devy Light, where no one is given a Devy player. They are given picks and rebates to try to acquire Devy. We do a draft in season every year, and you can kind of see the results of last year's on the board, where they will pick. And what this means is, come this auction period, Charlotte, who's now Miami, Florida, during the Devy, they had selected Marvin Harrison. That means Miami now, or Charlotte previously, has the rights to Marvin Harrison as like a verbal commitment. And what it really means is that if they are to sign them in the auction, they get a discount on the final price. So if in the auction Miami wins Marvin Harrison for like $90, let's say, every player that you have has a rebate max of $20. So if it goes over $20, you're rebated up to $20. So Marvin Harrison goes for $90 and it goes to Miami. Miami gets essentially a final price of $70. $90 comes off, but I will then go back into the system and re-give them $20 when this happens. So the advantage is that some of these teams are given some avenues to try to get some players onto their squad that they've highlighted as either need or like in previous years, and they are given some advantages. This doesn't mean they're guaranteed getting these players. Like Miami would still have to secure Marvin Harrison. If someone outbids for both copies of Marvin Harrison, then Miami's shit out of luck. If someone gets the first copy, Miami would still have the opportunity to get the second copy of the rebate. No one else would hold the rebate in that ACC auction period. So Each team gets 2 rounds. If some players, let's use like Quinn Ewers, he didn't declare this year, so he likely is going to go back into the pool next year. If your player doesn't declare this year, you'll have the option to retain them. If they are retained in future seasons, the max rebate amount for that player is decreased by $5. So this year, like Louisville has Xavier Worthy. If he gets Xavier Worthy for more than $15, that's his max rebate's going to be $15 anyway. So those are the pieces to have. And when we do this is at the start of the freshman portion of our auction, I will nominate all the eligible Devy pieces for each auction period. And that's kind of the initiation of the kickoff for the freshman period, and then people can nominate them as is. And the only reason we do that first is because it gives people the highest opportunity to get them up, get their rebate player instead of having to fight the nomination board. It also allows me the easiest opportunity to apply rebates. It's more likely people who own the rebate are going to get their first copy either for one reason or another. And it just gives me an easier time to not have to find it or have you call it out. I can just know in the first 12 hours or within the first day, I'm likely going to have to pay attention and see who's won their Devy player or rebate behind it. So back to Lou's example, Lou had done a Devy selection and he turned out to be a dud prior to this, and so some instances of weaponized incompetent players have happened where you kind of poison pilled the another team by assuming that you're going to put it into just the max rebate amount, and some teams now have shied away from just pushing you all in because they're afraid of getting stuck with a player that's not nearly that valuable, because if you do get stuck with them, you don't have that rebate coming back. Like in the Jalen Werdemeyer example, Lou had all the benefit. He would, even if he went up to $20, Lou's going to get a rebate for him for $20 and essentially zero for him. But if anyone else takes him, that's way worse of a price point for Jalen Werdemeyer at that price, even at $15, $16, which I think what he went for in that instance. That's way worse for someone else to try to take that chance. So some people don't really. Depends on how aggressive you're trying to be. Some people don't put up fight with Devy because they don't want to have to deal with it. It gives some teams the ability to extend a bit further to grab guys they want, and the like. So that's the big piece. Any other thoughts on Devy before I move to transfers?
No, I mean, again, probably more will come out on this when we get to that point, but you're ideally trying to get guys in the Devy portion that are going to come to the NFL the following year, because if you just draft some freshman phenom, you're going to take, what is it, a $5 penalty for each year that they stay in. And at that point, over the course of time, if you're going to have somebody that's sitting around for 3 years, your $20 rebate is now $5. Not as worthwhile as it would be, if you took a senior or junior player that was going to declare early income right into the NFL, and you can get the full $20 rebate. Other than that, I think because there's not too much involved here, that the Devy portion is pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, I think the only thing that would go maybe against what you said is some teams holding really high valuable guys. Like let's use Bijan Robinson last year, who I think was almost across the board the 101 for Devy selections. Some people might have just taken Bijan not because they expected to get him in the auction, which I imagine most people did want them, but they didn't want anyone else to have the benefit. So it's maybe more of I'm going to take a highly valuable player because I just don't want anyone else to get the benefit, even if I don't get it.
Right, and I think you'll see that play out as teams kind of pick. Mm-hmm. And, especially with quarterback position being limited here, you'll see a lot of the um, early picks in most instances are quarterbacks, not always, but and again, this is going back a couple years where you have um, guys like C.J. Stroud and uh, I don't even like a Drake May. I think was another one that was a pretty early quarterback pick. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. But you'll see teams that are in a weird position at the top of the Devy draft that may not need, a quarterback, so that they're not going to throw money at that position. And maybe they grab a lesser position just for hopes that they use the rebate that way. Or you'll see teams that'll just take the, what Brian said, just take the, you know, perceived most valuable, whether they have a quarterback or not, and they just have a $20 rebate to themselves, and a team that would need one just is, shit out of luck and not gonna be able to use a $20 rebate on a quarterback, that particular quarterback. So there is a little bit of like strategy into like what player and how you kind of not address the Devi selections, but it's again, it's just kind of each one's different. I don't think that any of them are alike. Like there's always some players that are pop up pretty early in certain Devy drafts that aren't drafted at all in other ones across the league. So we get a pretty fascinating like grouping of players, just because again there are a couple different strategies to be used in that process.
Yeah, and for purposes of the auction, it really just comes down to just understanding the rebate piece and knowing who has what. To find who has the rebates for things. Didn't put it in there, but on Slack, if you're on Slack, you can just type in link to Devi, and it'll pop up this same database, and you can see who has what, who is going to have what type of rebate. You can even see prior years, so you can see who's won for what prices. If you wanted to compare like what type of rebate people saw for what things, just to kind of give people some food for thought on those pieces. But the choices that people make for auction periods is likely going to be something they're made in season, and you just kind of live with those decisions, and that'll be something that can be covered at a later point. But for right now, that's Devi. Before we even get to the Devi and kind of the main piece, we have a period of right before the freshman period called our transfer period. So this allows upperclassmen to be going to new teams, and teams that let players go are able to recoup some of that money back for players. So this is an opportunity for people to get a jump start on a rebuild, or try to cash out on something, or for teams that are buyers, this is an opportunity to kind of solidify being a contender or striving for one last opportunity at a run for a championship, something like that. But the transfer market is very interesting, I will say. It comes with a lot of different strategies that I would probably say are underutilized in this league. I think a lot of interest has predominantly been leaned on the freshmen, but I think the transfer market is likely going to become more and more of a thing, very, very similar to college football, more and more of a thing that people take advantage of or try to take advantage of. So before you kind of have a period of time, once the new season kicks or the new league year kicks off, you have a time to cut any upperclassmen that has remaining eligibility, and they're deemed to be a transfer, regardless if they're, you don't have to designate them as if they're just simply dropped. They have the opportunity to go to a new team, and depending on if they earn they go for any money, you get 50% of that money coming back to you as the team that released them, and so you get kind of some added bonus to letting a good player go, and they come back for some money. last year was actually quite interesting, and we had two big teams that dumped a lot of players into the pool. That was Texas A&M and Virginia. You can kind of see on this module with the history of things. Last year, Virginia dumped players like Devonta Smith, Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence as like their high-profile guys, and Texas A&M dropped players like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, Najee Harris, T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk. They just dumped him in mass because they believed their team wasn't good enough, or they wanted to get a jump start on restarting things, and they got a lot of money back, as you can kind of see on the right here. Texas A&M got $203, and Virginia got almost $170 back to use for freshmen in that same auction. So there could be a lot of value in it. Teams can become really good off of it. I think last year one of the beneficiaries of the Texas A&M purge was Ole Miss. They got Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins last year, as well as Drake London, and I think they ended up in the top 5 in the country. And that team was going to be good, but nowhere near that level last year. And I think this just kind of added to their depth to be good, to be even better, and contend with the rest of the SEC. And I think they made the playoffs and a bunch of stuff last year. So there's definitely some advantages by pushing your chips all the way in. And obviously some of those players like T. Higgins and Brandon Ayuk are gone now because they graduated last year. But, what's one real great run at the championship than that for teams. But it does come with its risks. There's been some instances where, like, some teams walk out with a really good deal. I think West Virginia tried to transfer a sophomore, Justin Fields, a year or 2 years ago, and the return was projected to be much more than what it ended up going for. So sometimes there's some risks, sometimes there's some definite rewards where players like Devonta Smith, who were juniors, they went for way more than probably what I would have ever paid for them, and things like that. So transfer period is definitely something to pay attention to. It also is a great opportunity to just kind of fill your roster in with some depth if you're a team that's really rebuilding. Lou, last year you were Baylor. You're picking up the pieces of a vacated team, and I think a lot of what you did in the transfer upperclassmen portion was just to get some bodies that maybe people weren't willing to spend money on or definitely pay attention to at the time, but you kind of just slotted them in because they're better than nothing, or better than what you previously had, and you can still cut them later and things like that. But there's still some benefits for some depth at those points too. I would imagine you'd agree.
Yeah, and it's for practically $0. I mean, maybe you spend $1 or $2 on. Not even I'd say somebody that's like high end, but like there's a couple where like another team might be like I might throw $1 at that guy, and so it's just one of those things here. I talk about it, ad nauseum, because it drives me insane when we get into looking at some of these rosters when we get into the season or closer to the season, and we are 30 people? Is that what we roster? 30?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see teams that are only carrying like 17 players. There's not enough depth even on like the best teams in this league where it'd be like carrying 17 players is okay. Like it just isn't. And so it's just like I don't know how to explain it, but it always drives me insane because you're literally allowing yourself to miss on an opportunity. Like, even if one of those guys goes off, what's those cost to you? $0, $1, $2, it's just a really easy way to fill out, especially in like minor, because again, the minor conference is a little bit deeper into the player pool, and so it's just always, if there's even guys that are scoring, 50 points over the course of a season, like Jake Bobo. Like, there were probably a 3 or 4 week stretch where he's useful. Like, I'm not saying you're starting him every week, but like in minor, if you have a really like tough time and somebody gets hurt or whatever, and he put up 15 points in week 7, 11 in week 8. I don't know what it was. There's one other week, where he has 8 points. And it's just those types of things can be valuable. Um, even if your team's not fantastic, right? You still just want to get games to win, to get bowl games or whatever it is. I just always think that there's just like an easy, just grab them. But then it's also like you said, I think it's an underutilized part of this league in both grabbing those guys, but then also like feel like the talent level there should be more consistent. Like last year we had, like you mentioned, those two or three teams that threw some big name talent into the pool, and then there were a couple, like I was gutting Baylor, so I threw a couple. Again, they didn't have a whole lot, but what they had I threw in there, and somebody else might have done the same thing. But like there's definitely some strategy here, and it's teams like, I'll use, I think it was Cincinnati as an example in the Big 12. Cincinnati had Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa, and it's just one of those things where it's like you have two quarterbacks. Is it nice to have two quarterbacks here? Obviously, do you need it? Maybe not.
I think two senior quarterbacks too.
Right. And I said there was a medical on Tua, I think, right. So maybe he had an extra year. So, but you're losing both of those guys within the next 2 years, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, now Joe Burrow got hurt, obviously, so you can't predict that. But like they'd have both put up similar points, and so it's just like, why not transfer one of those guys? And then especially like on top of that, he picks up CJ Stroud. Like that's like how much money have you invested into that position that you're not gonna use? Like, I'm sorry, you're just not gonna play all three of those guys, and so it just makes sense. Again, this is looking back at it, so like you obviously at the time when you could drop for the transfer portal, you don't know that you have CJ Stroud, but like if it was at all any part of your plan, he might have even had the discount on Stroud too. So maybe I think he did know that he was going to end up with Stroud because I think he had a discount. But it's just one of those things like if there's even a chance or whatever. And I see this probably more with the quarterbacks than anything else. Like you'll see now, again, a lot of these guys got, their value got destroyed this offseason with like Justin Fields, Sam Howell, like things like that. Some of these teams are carrying, like Marshall was carrying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks. And again, now they're not all viable options, but out of there might have been 2 or 3 last year, and it's just one of those things where it's like, why hold a Zach Wilson when now he's buried? Well, he was buried in New York, and then now in Denver behind whatever bum they drafted. But why waste that? Like if you cut that guy and let him go into the transfer portal, and somebody throws money on him, it's only going to benefit you. Like, if nobody throws money on that player and you want him back so bad, like...
You can't get him back, yeah.
Get him back. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's just like, especially with the quarterback, and the other players I don't mind too much, but like, the quarterback, when you only can start one, and there are other teams looking for a quarterback, so it's a position that's gonna bring some money, especially if you have a couple teams that need a quarterback and you're gonna throw a sure thing out there instead of them having to guess what rookie is gonna play well or see the field or even on their depth chart if they're gonna even start that year. Sometimes you throw a sure thing quarterback in there and you'd be surprised, what people are willing to pay for that. And again, it's somebody that you might have used for 1 week out of the season, uh, for a bye week filler, just because you have that luxury. You're telling me you don't want to spend that money on another position to make your team better. It's just one of those things that I think is extremely underutilized in the league.
Yeah, I think it really stems from people not really understanding where their team sits in like the competitive standing of the league, or even within their conference or division. Because I do think there is, and we're getting better at it, but I think for new people, if they're looking at this, really looking at your team and having some honest conversations about like, actually this team is kind of middle of the road, and if it's middle of the road, I would maybe try to make moves that are best for the long term interest of it, especially like when it comes to things like some seniors right now. Last year we had like some Jordan Loves, some Justin Herberts on teams that made no sense to keep them. They cut them loose, and they were able to reap some return back. I think even to a greater extent than like I'm going to hold them for this year, and if they win me some player awards or if they win me some extra dollars from draft capital, it likely wouldn't be more than what I get now, and I can use that money now versus like a hope and a prayer for next year to use that money. So some people, can make a Daniel Jones turn into like, I don't know, $10, and sometimes that's way better than holding a Daniel Jones that's not going to really do anything for your team.
Right, because I mean, if you add your $10 onto like maybe you have, a random 20 or 30 left at the end of your draft, and now that's a 30 or 40. It like you jump into a different tier of player. Like you that jumps you from like, okay, taking a third round or late second round wide receiver, and now you're gonna get one that maybe bottom of the first round. Like you can get some pretty good value with that. I said, or it gives you the money to like go all in on, your top guy or whatever. It just gives you that more flexibility because, again, everybody's starting budget is different, and so whatever you can do to get ahead, if you're competition, you just, extra money is always a good thing.
And for teams that are like really weak, like they have no shot. Like you last year, perfect example. Baylor had no shot in being good, even getting to a bowl game, even with the pieces that it did or did not have. So I think last year your big gets for reimbursement were Waddle and Swift. So those two guys on your team with no other assets really did not provide you any value. Like they were better going somewhere else. And so teams that are like really bad should really think of like the timeline with which I have an upperclassman or a senior or even a sophomore sometimes, depending on the state of your team. Like if I hold on to this player is not likely going to be better for me in the long run. Yeah, I can hold Jalen Waddle for another 2 years, but am I going to be really good? Or is the money I get for Jalen Waddle now able to put a better foundation to build off of in the long term? And I think some teams have a really hard time figuring that out, especially in minor. I think out of any conference that utilizes this needs to utilize this feature of the league, it's minor. Minor needs to get into like some cyclical churn on like this team is bad, they need to transfer their bad players. This team is good, they need to be buying those players because they know that they need to be extending themselves to be even better, because their window closes much shorter in minor. You get maybe a year or two of being really good, and then all your good players are likely leaving. So these are the opportunities to really kind of try to take advantage of that, and I think some teams started picking up on it, but more of them need to do it. And if you don't, I'm sad to say it, but more often than not, those teams are the ones that end up becoming vacant because they just get frustrated with it and they don't pay attention, or they don't necessarily see the forest through the trees kind of thing. So I think transfer is underutilized getting more utilized, but underutilized still, from both sides, from a buyer's perspective and from a seller's perspective. There's a lot of nuance in between, but figuring that piece out, I think, can help teams from a long-term perspective get a jump start on a rebuild, or really jump them into another stratosphere of like, I'm a really good team. Because you could think about it, you're competing with 100 other teams to become national champions. That's not easy to do, and so you need to really stretch yourself to like go all in to like take the advantage of those things. So that's kind of the auction in a very, very condensed nutshell. Auctions are very nuanced. It's a big dance. No auction is the same, so ACC will see an entirely different auction than what the Big 12 will. Minor is going to be its own beast. It's just important to remember that nothing is guaranteed in this. Prices change, options change, some level of flexibility is best. If you can just kind of figure out what you're willing to spend on players or what you think is a value for it, just stick to your guns, really work a good system, and try to be flexible when it comes to it. There's going to be instances where the board shrinks or the talent is drying up and you need to push all the rest of your available money in. The biggest thing I can really say is this money goes away. So if you do not spend it all, it's not going to make any benefit for you in the future. So if you do not spend this money, make sure you're paying attention. Make sure you're trying to spend as much money as you can. Be aggressive where you need to be. Be patient where you need to be. But at the end of the day, once the auction's over, any money you didn't spend just dissolves away. No one provides a benefit. No one gets to use it again. And it just becomes a missed opportunity. So if you don't spend that extra $1 or $2 on like, oh, I really want Caleb Williams, but I'm unsure if I want to spend this $5 extra. If you have $5 at the end of the auction, you're going to be kicking yourself you didn't go for it for some of those players that you really want. So that's what I'll kind of say for those pieces before we kind of move into what maybe to expect for this specific auction in class this year. Any other thoughts on just the general premise of the auction, Lou, before we move on?
No, I mean, I have fun with it. Take it for what it is. Again, you'll see some people, Brian has a million charts. You guys saw his tabs when he was going through his computer there. Try to have some sort of plan though. I mean, and if not, if you're gonna wing it, like stay fluid. I think we see it too often, and we saw it again because I'm in the Big 12, so we saw it there. Like I think it was Iowa State and I can't remember the other team. Were like fighting over Bijan Robinson, the first copy, and they spent like a week. It wasn't a week. I'm over exaggerating, but like they spent a crap ton of time going back and forth on that, and he was expensive. It wasn't cheap. I mean, you're talking. I don't remember. It was like $170, something like that. I can't like.
163.
Right,
and so like rebate, so he might have been like
but like they fought over, and this again gets back to two of the things that we hit on here. They fought over the first copy. There was a second copy that was out there, and they just fought over that the whole auction. The first couple of days, and they let other viable options off the board. And so then when it came down to it. One of them got the player eventually, the other one missed out, and then I can't remember what happened. Whether he immediately, I think what happened was then he immediately, like, out of anger, bid a crap ton of money on somebody else, and then the second copy went, like, I got the second copy because that's where I don't know what the price was, but I think it was cheaper. But that's where I, grabbed the second copy. I had no intention of getting Bijan Robinson out of that. And I said, but those guys fought over it. Then that guy forgot there was a second copy, put his money on something else, and then it just kind of went down the hill from there. So I think it's one of those things. Remember there's two copies, and be patient. Like, don't get locked in. Like, if you get locked in on one player and it's not going well for you, like, you're gonna miss the, a lot of really good players coming off the board. So you have to be able to be fluid and pivot. So if you aren't gonna make up a plan and you're just gonna wing it, remember that you don't have to always get like your guy. Like, there are other options that that are out there, and I think that that's still kind of one of the things that the two things that we still see, even though we've been doing this now, is people forget that there's a second copy, and people just get hell bent on gotta have my guy. And I see, not every, does everybody want a Bijan Robinson? Yeah. Is everybody gonna get him? No. And so, like, there has to be some, like, willingness there to have a plan B or C or D when we do this, because not everybody's going to get who they want.
Yeah, that's a great point for kind of leading into this year's class. I think a player like Bijan last year made sense for certain teams. Didn't make sense for some teams at certain price points. Let's use Luigi, for example. I would always contend that him spending $175 out of like a low 200 budget or low 200s budget was not smart. His team was, I think, bad, worse off enough that he shouldn't have like fixated on like a Bijan Robinson. Whereas it kind of fell into your lap and you found out some other pieces to form around it. But sometimes you go all in on one guy, it really hamstrings you from being able to like make the right moves, especially if it's the wrong position. If it's a quarterback, I'm always of the opinion in this format, quarterback's the penultimate thing. If you don't have a quarterback, you're not going to go anywhere. So if you're putting all in on a quarterback, you can at least in the future make moves around that foundational piece. A running back or a wide receiver, that's really hard for me to like feel like you made the right move in that space to move on. So let's move into kind of what we expect for this season. This year, I think, is very interesting from the standpoint that I think for two reasons. I think the number of QBs that are going to be available is going to be very interesting. I also think the landscape of QB in the league is kind of decimated with the graduation of most Tua Tagovailoa copies, Justin Herbert's, and Joe Burrow's. I think with those guys graduating, there is this huge vacuum with QBs in the league that a group of 5-6 QBs being available to get is very advantageous for people to take advantage of. But I don't know what are your general thoughts on how this is going to shake out this year.
I think you're gonna like everything's in tiers. I mean, and we've seen this obviously in whatever the hell the other league is called, but Caleb Williams is in the quarterback tier by himself, and you're gonna see the other guys are just kind of in whatever order, the Drake Mays, JJ McCarthy's, trying to think.
Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, Jaden Daniels. They're all gonna be I think around the same price point. Maybe a Jaden Daniels is a little bit higher. But I think that they're all going to be worthwhile. I think it's just kind of one of those where you'll see teams that don't have a quarterback but feel like they have a really good team and need one to play right now. I think those guys are going to go after Caleb Williams. Maybe they go after Jaden Daniels if they can't get Caleb Williams. The others are just kind of teams that are like, I would see them going to teams that are either aren't in a rush to build, or they have that maybe like a medical red shirt to if someone did that, or I'm trying to think of what other senior quarterbacks that are out there. But if you have a senior quarterback on your roster, maybe this is where you're looking for a Bo Nix or a JJ McCarthy, one of those guys. I think will be a little bit cheaper, but still have some money in there. I think that's the other thing is everybody's going to be different because you did mention there's a good bit of quarterback that have left the player pool, and so with getting so many, it's just going to be how that breaks down conference to conference. Like scrolling through, like there are some teams that don't have quarterbacks. There are conferences where each team has one usable quarterback. There are conferences where there are still some teams that have two or three usable quarterbacks, and that obviously means that somebody has none, and so it's just going to be that supply and demand. But I think they all get. Obviously, Caleb Williams is going to go for a big number. I think Jaden Daniels will go for a big number, but I'd say there's probably going to be $20 to $30 difference between those two.
Oh, really?
I would think in this format because again, like Jaden Daniels is in Washington, which has been a shit show for the longest time. And again, I know Chicago's been a shit show, but like Caleb Williams is stepping into an offense that's freaking loaded. Like the Washington Commanders do not have an offense like Caleb Williams has. And I think that that's one of those things where like that day one top, like I'm the dude in a good offense, like there's just more there's a better chance things go right for Caleb Williams than they are for any of these other guys. Just my opinion. Just a little bit more polished for day one. So I think that there's going to be a pretty big gap there. And then I think that you'll see probably the same kind of gap between Jaden Daniels and the rest of the quarterbacks, the McCarthys, the Mays. Michael Penix Jr. is going to be the interesting one. Draft capital says yes, invest in him, but the fact that in this format we only have these guys for 4 years, maybe a fifth if we medical redshirt them or rookie redshirt them, you're talking about him playing behind Kirk Cousins for 3 years. Again, I know maybe it's 2 years best case scenario, but how much money do you want to invest in somebody that might get their shot 2 or 3 years from now? Like might get that shot, and so I think that he'll be kind of the most diverse one. Like we'll see team players that love him and are going to spend money on him because of the draft capital that Atlanta put into him, but then we're going to see like there's going to be some cheap gets there because people are just not going to know how to navigate that choice with him. So I think he'll be the most diverse one, and then Bo Nix of the first rounders is going to be the cheapest all day long, and so that'll be like a good player to go to Kent Reed, Kent Wright, Kent State.
Few things. I do think Caleb Williams is going to be obviously the highest paid player on average in this format. I just think the value of QB is going to push him up, be the most expensive player we see. The interesting thing I can't wait to see is the teams that are good outside of not having a good quarterback. Are they going to jump into the bucket? I need Caleb Williams this year because my team otherwise is not good or can't compete. So the teams that like just lost Joe Burrow, but I have all these other assets that are like stacked to the brim. If there's no viable like transfer QB that comes onto the market, which I would contend they would be better off putting their dollars on like a senior than like try go after Caleb Williams. But if they don't and they go after Caleb Williams, are they willing to like spend their entire budget like they were for, like some teams were last year with like Bijan Robinson? And we see this just dollar price point that's 150 plus for Caleb.
Yeah, that's right. That's where I would see it going, and that's why I think that you're probably going to see a $20 or $30 difference between him and Jaden Daniels. I don't think everybody's going to do it. I don't think like all of the teams that fall into that category going to do it, but I think you're going to see a lot do it because at the end of the day, I mean, you and I know without, I know you have like a little projected cost thing on your fancy sheet there, but you and I both know without using that, without even, looking at player needs or team needs, like if those quarterbacks are at least going for $100 all day, then it becomes okay. At what point, if you're gonna put $100 on Caleb Williams, not get him, and you're gonna have to put $100 on Jayden Daniels, would you rather have the sure thing or like the second option? And that's where you get guys that are going, okay, now I'm at a 120, now I'm at 150. And again, I don't know how where that caps. Does he go to 170? I don't know, but I'm not going to be shocked if he doesn't get to like the 120, 130 range pretty easily. And then from there, I'm trying to pull up because you're looking at like I just put up my Anthony Richardson copies. He got the 110, 111 pretty easily. I would say that Caleb Williams is probably a better prospect than an Anthony Richardson. So I think that you're in the 120. If you want Caleb Williams, you're probably putting a proxy of 120 on him. And then from there, it's just going to be how many other people in your conference are willing to do that or want to fight for that. And I think we will see a couple that go up to like that 150, maybe 160 range where we saw Bijan. I don't think, again, I don't know what everybody's budget is, but I don't think you're going to see teams that are like, everything I've got is going on that guy. But yeah, the 150 range, I think, is definitely a possibility.
Well, Jayden Daniels, the interesting thing about him is he was also not a heavy Devy selection. I think there were maybe 3 teams that took Jayden Daniels in Devy. So I also see like Drake May was heavily touted, and I think even JJ McCarthy were like heavily coveted as Devies where they were mostly taken. So the Devy element for Jayden Daniels is kind of like out the door. And obviously, everyone took Caleb Williams in one conference or another. So I think the question becomes like, does Jayden Daniels become like, if I need a quarterback and I'm not going to fight for all these Devy players, am I just going to sink everything I possibly can into the one viable asset? Because I think the chasm, no one, like you said, no one's really going to spend too much on Michael Penix. And I don't think people view Bo Nix near the same value, near the same level of Jayden Daniels. So I think like Jayden Daniels to me becomes this enigma of like, does he become the sink for this money where everyone who doesn't have this Devy rebate are just trying to like secure this copy because they don't want to fight someone with Devy, with a Devy rebate on a player.
Yeah, but I think that opens its own can of worms, though, right? Because then if you get a couple people that are thinking like, okay, I'll stay away from Caleb Williams and that's what I said. Like that's going to be the problem. Is you're going to have people that are going to go, okay, I'm staying away from Caleb Williams because I know he's going to cost $120 to $150. I'm out at that price point. So the next best option is going to be Jayden Daniels, and that's what I mean. Like he's going to go for $100. Like in most cases, again, not maybe you get them cheap or whatever, but like when you're at that point, and again, if you have 2 people that are thinking the same way, then it becomes one of those things where it's like, right. And I said, and it's one of those things where it then becomes is like, okay, so would you rather do that, or would you rather then chase down a Caleb Williams? And I think if you're going to do that, then you might as well fight the proxy on Caleb Williams. Again, you're talking about a $20 difference. Would you rather spend an extra $20 to, again, fight with somebody's proxy, and just get the guy you want, or just go, okay, whatever. I'll take the next best thing for $20 less. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I could see if enough people, especially because that's a good idea about. I didn't think about Jaden Daniels. I did look in on Michael Penix because I thought that would be an interesting one, and he's owned across the league, but only in a couple conferences. So there's going to be some interesting things there with navigating Michael Penix because some teams have that rebate and might get a hell of a deal on a first round quarterback.
I think for those teams, those ones specifically, if I were them, I'm sitting at $20, and that's almost like a perfect deal for me. I set it at $20. If it goes above, you could try it the next copy for $20, and because you've really nothing to lose, right? Like I have the Devi rebate on Michael Penix for those few copies that took him. I'm putting him at $20. If someone bids over, then they have to pay that dollar amount for Michael Penix. And if someone loves him that much, like $20 worth,
You probably
$25
weren't getting him
worth.
anyways, right?
Yeah, then it's like, I mean, maybe it's not worth that. Maybe I could extend based on if it's like the second copy, but I mean, if you get him, he's $0 essentially for you at that price point, and I just feel like a $0 Michael Penix is totally worth it because he just sits. I mean, you have a 30-man roster. He can sit if he ends up like anywhere close to like the last season of Jordan Love, which we just saw last year. I mean, that to me a $0 player is worth potentially holding on a 30-man roster for 3 years to just see him turn into that if it's a possible lottery ticket. So I think Penix, for the people that had taken him as a Devi, will probably reap the benefit of it, and people that didn't might have some. I mean, there's plenty of conferences that no one took him, so I mean, like,
Well,
it's
right,
just really a guess. But the
right,
people that
and I
did
think that
take him,
that's like the perfect storm.
yeah,
And I think, and again, I wish I wrote down how many conferences, how many copies there were of him, but it's one of those where it's like if you have the rebate on him, you're probably getting it because again, think about this. Like, why would anybody bid against you? Like, so even
yeah,
if that price goes higher and somebody goes, okay, I value him more than $20, but if I throw 40 on him or whatever, and again, I don't know, but I don't think he's going to be in the 100. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be in the $100 tier. I don't think he's going to be in the $70 tier. I maybe see him at $50, at most. I don't know, but if somebody has a $20 rebate on that, you're not gonna fight them for that guy. You're just gonna let him have it and live to see another day. And I think that that's just like one of those things where if you have him, it's gonna be awesome. And the conferences that don't have any Penix rebates,
ooh, actually,
they're gonna go back and forth. And I think he's gonna be significantly higher in those conferences than he would in the other ones. So I think it's gonna be a nice not only.
oh, he was owned in he was a Devi in every single one, so he is going to
Oh, is he?
be, he's going to be actually
Who the hell?
a.
Maybe I'm trying to think of what quarterback. One of the quarterbacks. Maybe it was
But
Jaden
it was
Daniels.
Bo.
I don't fucking.
Bo was not taken in every single one
Yeah.
for sure.
So,
I don't know if
um,
McCarthy was
I don't
taken
know
a
why I
lot
sat down.
either.
I'm trying to think of. I have it somewhere. I'm trying to think of who. So it wasn't Penix. Maybe it was Jaden Daniels. Maybe it was Jaden Daniels. I'm just missing.
Daniels was not taken very much.
Yeah. So maybe it was Jaden Daniels. Um, but yeah, the teams that have Michael Penix, it's gonna be really kind of interesting
I almost think if
to
everyone,
see.
if he's in every single, if he's a Debbie selection every single one, I would be dumb to think that he just doesn't go for $20 to those Debbie teams for that one copy, right? There's two
Right.
copies, so whatever happens in the second one, but every Debbie owner is going to walk away with a Michael Penix for $20, because that seems like too good of a deal to pass up, and you get a free Michael Penix, a backup quarterback to sit on your roster for really nothing. I just don't see that not being good business for someone to take. So, Bo Nix, I think's one that was only taken maybe three times last year. So that one's going to be interesting. Interesting selection. I think he was only taken by like ACC, Big 12. Am I really not seeing him in? No, he was taken in a minor. I was gonna say if he's not in minor, that's malpractice. Yeah, I think ECC, Big 12, and SEC and minor. So actually, more often than not, he was taken. So I think he will be an interesting one. I think he's going to be something that a lot of teams were hoping to fight for, as like a backup QB, like a QB2 on your team. I was viewing him as like the perfect backup QB if I have like a Brock Purdy or a Trevor Lawrence or even an Anthony Richardson or Stroud. Like I don't plan on playing him a lot, but if I need to play him for a bye week or an injury, I will slot him in there and feel like I can get some points and not have to pay like an arm and a leg for like a Drake May or maybe even more for like a JJ McCarthy. But I might be more viewing Nix and McCarthy getting closer and closer in price. It may be all three of those white guys.
Yeah, no, I could see. I mean, I think it went the same way in NFLU. I think May was the more expensive of those three, and then McCarthy, and I think then like if it tiered off, it's Williams by himself, a little bit of gap, Jaden Daniels, a little bit of gap, Drake May, JJ McCarthy, a little bit of gap, Bo Nix. Now, the NFLU was different because we do it before the draft, and so Michael Penix was filtered in there somewhere. But with how the draft went for him, like I think in terms of value, money spent, he's probably getting bumped.
Well, I think also with the fact that Penix is rendered useless, like Bo Nix is going to rise in price.
And so I think that Penix is going to go to QB6, and then it's going to be okay. Again, what are you willing to pay to maybe have a Jordan Love one season? Like maybe have it, and I think that's kind of, some people it'll be worth it. Other people it's not going to be because again, like with Jordan Love, was further along in that process when people took him in this league, if that makes sense.
For sure, yeah. They didn't spend that money. They bought him at like $1 for his junior and senior season. Right. Yeah. So different, but.
And I think too, like in terms of some of these other guys, I think another interesting while you have the quarterback screen. I don't know anything about Michael Pratt, but I think Spencer Rattler, QB2 in New Orleans, might be a cheaper version of a Michael Penix, like without like having that clear cut. Like Atlanta's going obviously trying to replicate that Jordan Love scenario. I think talent wise, like Spencer Rattler might be one of those guys too that you could get super cheap, store, and then maybe get year 4 something out of him. I don't know the specifics of Derek Carr's contract, but just Spencer Rattler was one that's just kind of interesting because there always seems to be somebody, one of these later round quarterbacks that just seems to be relevant, even if it is out of a QB2 role for a team, playing stopgap for a year or half of a season. And so like Spencer Rattler out of the rest of the groups of quarterbacks might be that guy too.
Yeah, I think you're kind of like referring to like what Sam Howell was last year, where he filled in. I don't think anyone because he was a 5th-round QB. No one was expecting like his value cratered coming into the draft, and then he got like a year of starting, and put up a ton of points. And you don't shy away from that. You just like played him a bunch, and like I imagine that's worth $10 somewhere for the right team. But yeah, QBs I think is going to be just generally the linchpin of the entire auction for every single auction. I just think it's got so many options where usually last 2 years when we've done a rookie auction, there's not been this many options. It was one. But I think just the general landscape of QB in the league is very lacking to the point that the need is high enough. So I'm expecting it to be just a hot market for QBs if I was expecting this. Doesn't mean that we will see some really bargain deals. I would expect some people don't heed this or don't see it this way, or the whole conference doesn't see it this way, and some deals will be made that'll be like, we'll be doing like a post-auction thing, and we'll be like scratching our heads like, how the hell did this team get that guy for that price? That will happen, but I expect it to be a hot market, and I think one of the things we'll be looking at is just how much does Caleb Williams set the table for everyone else, because I think whatever the price he's going for is going to set the table for all these other guys. So how about let's move to this one, because I think it'll be quick. Running backs. What's your take on them? I'm personally of the mindset this is year. I'm usually all about running backs, like looking for them. Can't wait to spend a bunch on them. This year I don't think there's a guy I'm like super in love with or want to spend any sizable amount of money on. I'm probably going to like really pick at the pile wherever it seems best from a price point perspective and like a talent perspective, but I don't know if you have any similar opinions. Did he die?
No, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh.
I hit mute, and I forgot that I hit mute. I mean, I'm with you. I think I take a different. At least I try to take a different running back approach than you. I mean, sometimes I end like Bijan. Like I'm more of like, if they fall in my lap, they fall in my lap. Great. Like I don't typically go out looking to spend on big backs or like top backs. Like I'd rather have like, if you looked at my rosters, like you're gonna go, oh yeah, like I have Jaleel McLaughlin, I have Keaton Mitchell, like Tyjae Spears. Like I'm always like trying to get those guys, like Tony Pollard's, like that's what I target because I think that the cost per point there is a little bit better than it is to pay a shit ton of money for the best guy. But this draft is so watered down at running back. I don't know if I'd be thrilled to have any of these guys. That being said, some of these guys are going to be of value. I just have no idea who the hell it is. Like I have no idea, because like even the guys I liked got shitty landing spots. The guys I didn't like went higher than I thought. It's just so I have them tiered. Really, anything in terms of value you want above the RB9, so you're talking like Will Shipley and up ish area. But then you look at where that group went, like I don't know. Will Shipley's buried in Philadelphia. Bucky Irving in Tampa Bay might be an interesting one, just because I think he's really only got Rachaad White there to worry about. I don't know how to say Audric Esteem or Esteem. I have no idea how to say that, but in Denver, again, you're talking about the running backs at least as high as 7, if not 9, 10 in that range. But like he's in Denver behind whoever the hell Denver at. I mean, I like I mentioned Jaleel McLaughlin. He had a pretty good run for Denver last year. So like, is this the rookie they got this year going to play in front of that guy, behind that guy? There's somebody else on the team. I can't think of who the main running back is, but just too many of these guys. Braylon Allen is on the Jets. They got 8 running backs at this point, none of which are going to have value outside of, Brees Hall. Jalen Wright in Miami's nice. Right player, right system. Problem is like they've got 3 or 4 other Jalen Wrights already on that roster. So, I mean, it's just like, how valuable is he going to be? That really leaves you with the top 2 guys. I mean, Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks, obviously, the draft capital was being the first one taken. Even then, he was a second round pick 14. Not the best, not the worst, but he's coming. I think he tore his ACL. Is he an ACL guy? Yeah. So even at his best this year, like, you're probably not getting the best version of him until 2025. So I think he'd be a nice redshirt candidate. Again, like, he's probably in. He might only. Sorry, my sheets are all not as organized this year. So he's the only one running back drafted currently that's sitting on top of a depth chart, except for Carolina just brought somebody in, so I don't know if he is still atop it. And so maybe you use him this year, but again, like I said, he's coming off an injury. I think you see a better form of him next year. And then you have, I think, Trey Benson in Arizona could be interesting. Again, but they're not anybody that's there's no one here that I'm like pounding the table that I have to get. I'm looking. Yeah. Oh no, they've rearranged their depth chart, so they've now put Chuba Hubbard is now in front of Jonathan Brooks in Carolina, and they still have Miles Sanders, and they just brought in Rashad Penny. So even then, like, that running back room for your top running back taken, it's just kind of tough spot. So Marshawn Lloyd, I know Joey loves him, but the dude fumbles way too much to be of any value. He has to get that fixed. Blake Corum, I think, is interesting. He absolutely could do nothing because Kyron Williams just takes all the handles there, or he could get some and be useful.
I think it's like what they were saying on the unofficial podcast, and I agree in this sentiment. He is like the similar player to Kyron Williams, and all it's going to take is Sean McVay to have an injury to force feed Blake Corum to death, and he becomes this productive outlet. It just seems like something Sean McVay is willing to do. Just cast aside the person to play the hot hand, especially if they've been super productive. I do think Trey Benson's probably one of the better landing spots. That I have to assume James Connors is about to break down. Like, at some point, he just can't continue to be productive. He got banged up a bunch last year. I imagine that trend continues, and all it's going to take is Trey to, like, prove something. But otherwise, I'm just like, none of this is aspiring. Like, I don't want to spend a lot of money on any one of these guys this year personally. But running back needy teams could get tantalized by a certain guy like Jonathan Brooks, or some camp story comes out about Jalen Wright and they get excited about that. I could see that totally happening. But otherwise, I think we see this. The group that gets the money spent the least amount on this year is going to be running back, where usually, I think the last couple of years we've seen that market be one where people tend to stretch more for.
Yeah, it'll be light. I mean, I think Brooks and Benson will have a market. Mm-hmm. You're going to see a gap. The others are all going to be together, right? Lloyd, Corum. Then I think, like, pre-draft, I would have said Allen's in that group. Post, I mean, Brees Hall, Israel Benacana, then maybe Braylon Allen, and they took another one. I don't know. Was it Ray Davis? I'm trying to think
No,
of who
Ray
the
went to
other.
Buffalo. Ray went to
Oh,
Buffalo.
they took another one. I don't know. I can't remember who it was, but like there's another running back that they took there, and so it's just one of those things where if the GM doesn't really seem like he's into any of these guys because he just keeps taking more, then I can't imagine the coaching staff is either. So I'm not really sure what to think about Bray Allen. I probably bump him out of that tier with those guys. So he's in that tier with like your Will Shipley's, Bucky Irving's, the dude from Denver.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I don't think um, if you need running backs, again, I wouldn't cross your fingers and or anything, but maybe this is the year you take a stab at three or four of them, and maybe you get lucky. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's sometimes those are the type of player pools in the years where like it can be really beneficial for you, even though on the you know like before we get into this, it doesn't look as good, but like after the fact, maybe you grab a couple guys. Again, I don't think you're gonna see any studs out of this group, but you might get some good like Tony Pollard type players or a Kyron Williams type player down the road eventually, and things like that tend to pay off. So I think that maybe we could have some of those guys in here, but the price point's definitely gonna uh, make some teams players at running back that might not need one. I think that you'll see that too, just because it'll be a cheap position that some people are just gonna be like, oh well, I had money, I had to throw it somewhere. Why not? $20 is nothing. Let's throw it at Will Shipley.
Yeah, I think this is the thing to remember about this format is depth is actually pretty important. 30-man rosters and 8 starting lineups or 8 players starting lineups. You can't always put like with injuries and bye weeks that happen. You can't always put like the studs out there. So sometimes you have to hope that one of these guys just gets enough touches and they can be viable for a week or two to like fit in as the 8th guy or something over time. And sometimes that's just worth it in its own, so you still like spend a few dollars on them. But I don't expect anything to be close to 100 on any of these guys. I think like what I have projected is probably likely what I would view as a ceiling of like $50-$60, no more than that for any one of these guys. And I only likely see that stretch happens like the board is shrinking on talent and you just like, I have a shit ton of money, I gotta get rid of it somewhere, and you just take like a flyer on like a Jonathan Brooks if they just happen to last that long. So
Right. Well, and I think you're gonna see the Debbie rebates play a role on the running backs too, because some of these
yeah,
guys
yeah,
like
that's true.
Braylon Allen, Will Shipley, I think I saw some Trey.
Yep, some Treys.
Um,
No Jonathan Brooks, but
yeah,
Treys definitely, Shipley's and
eh,
Allen's were quite a few.
right. So like you're talking about again, we're getting back to like probably a free Will Shipley,
Yeah, probably. That's a
pretty
good
damn
idea.
close to a free Braylon Allen,
Blake
and
Corum's
then
another one.
your Blake Corum, like after the rebate, maybe you spend $15. I don't know. You know what I mean? And so that's gonna make a cheap position even cheaper for some of these teams, and so there's gonna be some money left around to throw a wide receiver.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do forget that we had those people those guys taken. But since you brought up wide receiver, we'll just move into that piece and we'll try to wrap up here. Um, I don't know about you, but I do view this as like deep, a deep fucking class. I didn't expect so many to get such high capital this year, um, but I think it'll make for a lot of different options. I think I'll start with the question here. There's kind of this tier break, I think, a unanimous tier break, and maybe even a tier break within there. But the top 3 wide receivers, how would you kind of view them as going in terms of price? Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze. Do you think they all go similar prices, or do like the common consensus you hear a lot of people say is like Marvin Harrison is just so freaking elite, he's just gonna go for a shit ton of money. I don't know if you have a certain viewpoint on how those three get handled or not.
I mean, I think he's going for a shit ton of money. If I had to rank them, I mean, your thing's projecting Marvin Harrison at 116. I don't think we're gonna see. I think that's probably off by $50. I think that, again, based on
Like
what we're
higher?
talking
Like
about,
you think
yeah,
higher?
yeah, I think
Okay.
he's going higher. Well, you have to think about kind of how this type of uh player is, equivalent. Like, he's the guy that everybody's been waiting for out of this class. Like, you had that same kind of feel with your Bijan Robinsons. And again, I get that the quarterback or the running back position tends to be a little bit more expensive for those top guys,
Mm.
but we just have ran through this that we're saying, hey, you know, if you need a quarterback, throw some money here. So you're gonna have teams throwing money at quarterback, and if they're doing that, they're not gonna have a whole lot of wiggle room to throw at a Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze like type player. Um, Especially when we just finished talking about running backs, where we're like, nobody wants to touch this with a 20-foot pole. Um, you're gonna have money left. Like teams are gonna have a good bit of money, and it's one of those things where it's like you're either going to go for diversify your wide receivers or pick the top dog and just get them. And so I think that you're going to see that Marvin Harrison is we're probably seeing, again, like I said, probably in the same neighborhood of Caleb Williams. We're probably going to see a $150 Marvin Harrison. Again, not in every conference, but I think some of them, because people are going to go back and forth. Because when you look at the top three, yes, they're all talented, but Malik Neighbors has got freaking, what is that dude's name?
Daniel
The
Jones.
quarterback. Yeah, Daniel Jones. I was like, I have his stupid face stuck in my head from his interview the other week, but I couldn't think of what his name was. You have Daniel Jones there, and so, like, how does that look? How does that work? Does that hurt his value short term, long term? Like, what are they doing at quarterback there? Um, I'd argue Rome Odunze is probably in a better position than Malik Neighbors. Like, I personally would probably rather have Rome Odunze than Malik Neighbors, but
I think I would
um,
too, but I think I would do it with the intention of redshirting him, knowing that he's not likely going to be this uber productive guy year one with like Keenan and DJ Moore there. Neighbors
yeah,
at
but I
least
mean,
is
I don't
like
think
the
he's
only
gonna have a
big
bad.
one.
I don't think he'll have a bad year. I think it's just necessarily like your best years will come out of him once Keenan Allen for sure is gone. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, if I'm ranking him, Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, I have Marvin Harrison kind of in a tier by himself. The other two identical. It's just a matter of preference there. Um, Brock Bowers is way too fucking high on that list
Way,
for
way,
me.
way too high. Yeah.
Um, I don't view him there. I think Brian Thomas is an intriguing option. Uh, I like. I have the rebate on AD Mitchell, so I like him. There's a good bit of guys. I mean, you've got to scroll down for me to see how far this list goes to where it's like till I'm like not interested at these wide receivers anymore. Yeah, so like Xavier Leggette's on there at 13, Polk at 14. I like Corley at 16. I like, so I mean there's a pretty good like list of even some of these guys like
Some of
Jermaine
them.
Burton at Cincinnati is at 22. So like there's a good bit of potential
Oh, and
you
he's
know,
not even.
wide receiver guys here. So I think that this is probably where most of the money is going to go. Um, but it's just kind of like one of those things. Would you rather have? 'Cause again, you're talking about teams throwing together. Like, would you rather have A.D. Mitchell, Keon Coleman, and like Ricky Pearsall, or would you rather just have Marvin Harrison? And so I think that that's kind
Oh,
of what you're gonna
I
see,
know
right?
my answer, but
Yeah, but I think that that's kind of gonna be the big debate, out of which, of this, because if you're gonna do those late three, those three, like, then you can maybe grab a running back or something. But if you're gonna go for like Marvin Harrison, you have to go Marvin Harrison and then like one other thing or two other things. You know what I mean?
well,
It's gonna be
it
one of those.
depends. It depends, right? So like, if Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison and both copies, like let's say they all go for like around 150, that's like 600 out of the like $3,400 that's just sucked out of that market. And if Neighbors and Odunze and the other quarterbacks are so expensive, that's even more money just pulled out of the market, even more. And if I'm a team that extended, I would love it if more money's pulled out of the market on less and less players, because then I can go back to the Ricky Pearsall's and Keon Coleman's and Roman Wilson's and Jermaine Burton's, and I can maybe get one or two of them, and not have to like spend an arm and a leg. I can maybe spend that $20-$30 that they might end up going for, and feel really good about what I pulled. So it will be interesting to see how it happens. I could also see a world where everyone views these players very similar, and so the market doesn't really like, it just plateaus and everyone's spending the same, and that doesn't really benefit anyone. If everyone's going for like, for the people that stretched, everyone's going for like $50. It doesn't matter who it is. It's just like a floor. You pay $50 for any one of these wide receivers at that tier. I could see that happening too. So it'd be interesting. I think we'll see some different flavors. I think that the conference that will really be interesting, especially for wide receivers and quarterbacks, is the minor one, because I think the need is always there, right? Like there's less ability to build up that depth. So like I will always, no matter which minor team, I always need a Xavier Levitt on my team.
Right. Well, and I think this is a great draft for minor, right?
Sure,
Like
for sure.
there's not many where that come along where we've got, what did we say, six first round quarterbacks. So there's six that are going to have some sort of value at some point.
Yep.
And then maybe one that has a value as a QB2. But then the list of wide receiver. I mean, there might be 30, some that are going to have some sort of value, especially with the new kick return rules. In the NFL, some of these guys are specifically brought in for that role, and then that's going to provide some points for teams like minor. I mean, to fill your roster out with some of these guys is just crazy, because in years past, you're talking about like, I think I drew the line last year in terms of anything being useful at wide receiver at like wide receiver 13. Anything after that was just kind of like, okay, like, and this year, I mean, that list is ridiculous. I mean, the quarterback, I don't even think I drew the list of the quarter. I don't even think I drew a line for quarterback, but like I said, I think at RB9, anything after that last year was kind of worthwhile, or not worthwhile. Tight end 4, anything after that, not worthwhile. It's just a pretty deep, like, skilled position across the board for fantasy. So I think that it's a good depth building year, even though there's some. I mean, it's not the best top end talent. I mean, you have a couple guys at wide receiver. Outside of that, like we said, no running backs. Um, the quarterbacks, I think, outside of Caleb Williams, are going to be a little interesting, but just kind of a good overall solid depth class that I think if teams can put together the right pieces, that like you can make a really really kind of good. Again, I don't know if there's too many guys I'm playing this year. Outside of the
No,
top,
it,
like Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, you know, maybe Malik Neighbors. If Danny Dimes doesn't throw into anybody else. Um, Other than that, like I think it's a red shirt and build for the future type of year. So it'll just kind of be interesting how that works out.
I do think one thing we didn't talk about, but is definitely worth mentioning, is there are a few seniors in the wide receiver world that are worthwhile planning for their graduation. So like Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, like natural copies of them are due to graduate this year. And who else would fit that bill? There's some other ones I think that fit. T's gone.
Yeah, it's hard because these guys don't uh, clean up their rosters.
Yeah, I mean, we did just lose Justin Jefferson and Brandon Ayuk and some really productive guys last year, but I think we're set to lose like some chases,
I just put it up:
some
Jamar Chase,
Gabriels.
Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle,
That's
Rashad Bateman. Um,
so like
that looks like
that's
it's
quite a
kind
few
of
guys we'll lose at the end of this year. So if people are planning, they might be trying to get some of these wide receivers to stack on a red shirt.
yeah.
That way they have them for next year ready to go. So
Running
that'll be
back, you're losing. Sorry, I'll run through them all. Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, Stevenson in New England, Chuba Hubbard potentially. Um, Quarterback, you'd be looking at your Trevor Lawrence's, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson's, again, depending on medicals and all this other things. The rest of them quarterbacks are ass, so we don't need to read through them. Kyle Pitts, potentially Pat Fryermuth. That's really kind of it at tight end. So that's kind of the guys that you need a future plan for.
yeah. So I think it'll if people plan for the future, they'll be trying to make roads to like grab some of these guys too. So it'll be interesting. But I'm excited. Like I said at the beginning, we're trying to fill the last few positions, the last few vacancies. Once we do that, I'll be able to set a date for our auction, and we can get the ball rolling on that front. Um, Hopefully, this is instructive. Hopefully, people learn a few things. Hopefully, people have some time to review their team, review some of these tools. These tools are available for people to look at, review. They are by no means like indicative of what exactly will happen, but hopefully it just gives you some frame of mind to like, oh, I shouldn't be expecting like really cheap player, this really guy to go for really cheap, or oh, I should remember that this guy has a Devi on this player or something like that. So it's just to hopefully keep the information up enough in an easy, accessible manner for people to use in a whatever they see as beneficial. But any last pieces of advice, Lou? Otherwise, we'll close up for this evening and we'll get this out to everyone.
No, I think we got all the advice. I mean, it's again 2 copies.
Two
Um,
copies.
Pay attention to your Debbie rebates. Trying to think of what else. We kind of talked about. I think the big thing with this league would be like be active. I mean, again, you don't have to be checking this thing every 5 minutes. But you know, in regards to the auction, the off season, whatever. I mean, that stuff doesn't matter. But like for the actual auction, I check in a couple times a day just to keep an eye on it, take note of what other people are doing and when players are coming off the board, um, and be able to pivot. I mean, I said that earlier. I think that those are kind of the keys to like success here would be to be somewhat available, have that plan, be aware of the different kind of things you can do, whether that's your rebates or your red shirting, just those strategic things, just kind of put some thought into them, and then you know, be able to be fluid. Like if you don't get your guy, like, hey, here's plan B or plan C, or if I have to pivot completely, like it's not the end of the world if you get somebody like, if you're targeting Drake May because you have the rebate on him and you don't get him, like it's not the end of the world to settle for like a Bo Nix or a JJ McCarthy. You know what I mean? So, um, I think being able to do that is better long term for your team, for the league, than just being stuck on one guy and like having to have that guy to make your whole thing. Because I think that we've been doing this long enough now that you can kind of see the teams that aren't actively checking in during the auction, that are getting stuck on one or two players, don't have a plan, can't pivot, are the ones that we're having to replace. Because if you can't do those things, it's going to be very hard for you to build a contender. You're just going to be stuck like in the middle of the pack, or worse, like the bottom third of the pack, because you're not going to get any better if you can't adjust, but then also take advantage of some of the things that we talked about, whether that's the transfer portal or the rebates or the red shirts or what have you. Like those things are all there to be used as a competitive advantage or a strategy advantage, and so use them.
Yeah. I think the last thing I will say is don't expect to get a home run. Like some of these, if your team is bad, it's not always about like getting a home run. Like I got the three best players in the auction. Sometimes it's just about laying the groundwork, getting some usable people that you can build upon the next year. You're not going to be able to build a contending team in one auction period. It's going to take, that's just not, there's not enough talent usually available for you to do that. You can definitely increase your chances by doing really well in the auction from year, but sometimes it takes like the stacking or just incremental improvement. Like Lou last year built a base, then this year he's going to build upon that base. Or like myself, where my team is a little more primed for contending for something, my focus is much different. I'm looking to maximize the talent I have available. I might not be caring so much about what my team looks like in 2 years. I'm looking for the go ahead now, and then in 2 years, I'm looking to set my priorities are very different. I'm looking to reset myself. I'm looking for foundational pieces that I can build upon, making sure I have enough depth. But I'm not always expecting to walk out of there with a team that's going to vault me into the national championship conversation. That's just not realistic, and that should be something to kind of set your expectations on. Is you're not going to walk out of this with like a behemoth team, or like you do with some rookie auctions where like half the draft class is going to one team and they are primed to be this like juggernaut in 3 years. That's not how this really works. A lot of teams get the ability to bid on these players, and some of this really comes down to you just trying to incrementally improve yourself over time. So that'd be maybe my last piece of advice. But
Yeah, and if you don't know, ask. I mean, there's enough people in here that um I mean, there are some that don't want to share everything because they realistically think that they're going to have the best team every year out of the 100 people in here. But for the most part, everybody will just kind of be more than willing to kind of help if there's something you don't understand or don't know how to do. Same thing with when we get into like you win your Devi player and you need the rebate, like make sure you tag Brian so you get your $20 back or whatever it is. There's just always, I mean, there's enough forums or channels in the Slack that answers are usually found, and if you can't find something, don't be afraid to ask, 'cause there are people that will help even if they're not in your division or conference or whatever. Whether that's you have issues with the auction or finding players, or even if you have questions about strategies, if you can do something or can't use something, or why you would do something versus not doing something. There are enough people in here that know what they're doing that would be willing to help.
Yeah, I would say that I'm very, very candid with people that have reached out in the past, saying, "Hey, I'm not sure if this makes sense, or what would you do if you're in my shoes?" I'm very, very candid. I will tell you what I would do. I would give you some advice. Try to set your expectations correctly, and I know there are a few others. Sometimes you just need to simply throw it out for consideration with like a random chat, like, "Hey, what would you guys do in this front?" And you'll find, once the auction kicks off, there's a lot of conversations going on. People spiral off into like their own little chats to talk amongst each other if they feel the need to, or they'll like actively express something about a price and things like that. It's just a very lively conversation. And you can do some of those conversations ahead of time too to try to get an angle on some things. It's more information to use and things like that. So, with that said, we've kind of tipped over near 2 hours, so we'll cut it here. Any questions that come up from this, or any follow up from what's been discussed, feel free to reach out to either Lou or I, and we'll try to answer questions the best we can. There are plenty of others that will be willing to do that, and then, like I've said a few times, we're just waiting to get a few more involved, and then I'll set a firm date for when we will start this off. But hopefully it's instructive, and hopefully people find it useful. And thank you so much for joining me, Lou. And we'll do this probably likely after to kind of recap what happened and what we saw as surprises, or what were missed opportunities.
Sounds good.